All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I have an interview with Peter Nowell. Peter is a designer, a entrepreneur, and a wonderful teacher. He is the creator of Sketch Master, which is a great set of courses for those who are new to Sketch. And it's what I learned to get started on Sketch a couple of years ago. And he's recently launched a major update to the course. And so he was great to come along and do this interview with me. So welcome, Peter.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. For people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I really see myself as a graphic designer. I started professional design by doing digital UI, UX, and web. And that kind of progressively got me into graphic design. And now a fair amount of my work is training other designers.
Cool, cool, cool. So, just following on to that, and you're still freelancing, correct?
Yeah, I am. So I kind of see it as about half my time training and about half my time doing the practice of design, which I think also kind of makes me a better trainer. And at the end of the day, I really see myself as a designer. So if I'm not practicing it, I'll start to shrivel up and feel like I'm not creatively alive.
No, I totally get that. I do a lot of mentoring for new UX people and folks that are getting further along in their career. And if you don't do it, you lose it. So very, very
Yeah.
true. So what are your favorite types of projects of those that you do take on still?
Yeah. It's really funny because since I started to train more of the time, I have less time to take on design projects, whether they're my own or for clients. And so right now they're totally like all over the spectrum. Um, I think the thread that runs through them, and I'll get into like what types of design they are, but the thread that runs through them is like I kind of want to do something new most of the time. So on my own, I'm working on a couple typefaces. I've been really getting into learning type design. Um, I'm working on a digital adaptation of a short story with a friend of mine who's a novelist, and we've been working with a great illustrator in New Zealand to produce illustrations for this. And so I've been art directing, designing, and now developing the website for that.
Ah, cool.
Um, and I have a certain amount of experience doing branding and physical identity, like print, signage. So I'm working with a local eatery on that. Um, it kind of goes all, and then with Sketchmaster, I'm obviously designing and developing a fair amount of that. So that's anything from web, UX, designing visualizations and animations. It really stretches the gamut.
You are busy. What's a typical day like for you? How do you manage your time with all of these different projects?
So a typical day is I typically, well, like I'm totally independent with almost all of the projects that I do. So I have some people who help me with development, with writing, video editing, stuff like that. But I have to be incredibly self motivated and disciplined. So what I often find is that I spend the first half of my day just working at home, trying to catch kind of a creative wave in the morning as I'm like drinking my coffee. Maybe I'll be writing something. Maybe I'll be just getting through emails. And then I go over to a co-working space nearby, and which is where I am right now. And I try to work on whatever I identified that day's project to be. I really like breaking up my days into specific projects rather than having like every hour be something different. Um, and most of the time I'm able to achieve that. It's always a challenge, but yeah, it really comes down also to what the needs of each of the projects that I'm working on are. So sometimes I need to spend 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 days of a week working on getting a course out the door, and the rest of the time it might be a little bit more distributed between my projects.
Right, right. So with that in mind, how do you manage distractions like social media, like email, like all the incoming, all the input that just gets thrown at us day after day, hour after hour?
Yeah, I don't think I'm the best at it. And I think I end up making intentional or unintentional, like very hard decisions about what's going to make the cut. Um, I don't spend much time with social media. To me, social media has kind of become more of a chore. I don't post much about my personal life. I'm starting to try to like share a little bit more on my Instagram. But really, for the most part, social media is a way that I kind of announce articles or courses or projects or things that I've been working on. So it's kind of an extension of my work. And it's always funny because everybody has a different relationship to social media. So sometimes people reach out to me about professional stuff on Facebook or on Instagram with questions, or especially on Twitter, of course. And I am trying to do a better job of like seeing those come in a slew of like dozens of unimportant notifications. But when it comes to emails, I try to respond to every single one if it's not like soliciting something. And it's becoming like increasingly time consuming to get to any students, any prospective customers, anybody who's reaching out over email. But those are really my priority. And sometimes I have help responding to those. Those are distractions that I prioritize. And oftentimes the rest of it just kind of falls by the wayside because I'm really like, I'm pretty cutthroat with my time when it comes to like prioritizing what I value. And when I'm working on a creative thing, I need many hours, if not an entire day, to really sink my teeth into something. And when I'm focused, I become so focused, really productive, but also just like I can't be bothered with with notifications coming in. So I find that the days that I'm working on really on a creative task are the times that I have to shut out all of those other little chirps and bings and tweets.
Yeah, it sounds like you're perhaps a fan of that whole maker versus manager ethos. You know, where when you're making something, you're just everybody else go away.
Yeah, and that's one of the hardest things I think about being I don't normally refer to myself as an entrepreneur just because like I kind of cringe a little bit when a lot of people say I'm an entrepreneur. But like being a creative entrepreneur, having a creative business, whether it's like my creative services business or Sketchmaster, it's difficult because I'm both the maker and the manager.
Yep.
And I try to like partition my time because managing is like, okay, boom, 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 like you said, and maker is totally the opposite. But oftentimes it's that's a struggle.
What initially drew you to Sketch as a design tool?
I started using Sketch about 6 years ago in 2012 when I started started to explore digital design and user interfaces. So I'd been designing for a few years before then, not as like a full-time professional practice, but I was, designing brochures, occasionally a logo. The moment that I started doing digital design, I came across Sketch and I was like, okay, this is a tool that seems a little bit easier to dive into. Yeah. And I was kind of at the beginning of this wave. They had just won an Apple Design Award, which is what put them on my radar. And it was really at the very beginning of the wave of designers switching from Photoshop or Fireworks, occasionally other tools, to Sketch. And in droves. And what I found is before that big wave, there wasn't a lot of documentation or tutorials. And so I might be jumping the gun here as far as things that we can talk about, or things that we want to talk about. But I started to just like write an article or two about things that breakthroughs that I had had with the tool. And sometimes they were about the tool, and sometimes they were about just like vector graphics or best practices for workflows in general that I was discovering. And I wrote a couple of these articles, and they low key went viral, not in the millions, but like to break 1,000 viewers on anything for me at that point was pretty groundbreaking. So
Totally.
I was like, this is great. I'll write another. I'll write another. And so I kept doing that and realized that there was a really hungry and passionate audience around Sketch, people who were really enthusiastic about the tool like I was. So I kept doing it.
Now, is that what motivated you to create the course, or that sounds like that was definitely the impetus? But
Yeah.
what made you say,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I can teach this?
So at the time, and this is still the case, like I was writing articles not to have like a content strategy, a content marketing strategy, but just because I would come across a topic that I wanted to share an insight, something that I wish somebody had told me. And so they would come out periodically, but I didn't really see it as like a part of my work. And I went to a Sketch meetup. Again, this was pretty early days for Sketch, so everybody there was, or almost everybody there was kind of like new and trying to figure out what this tool was like. And somebody was giving a presentation about, and like a demo about how they were using Sketch at their company. And I was just cringing because there was so much misinformation being handed out, and so much like, oh, actually, no, you can't do that in Sketch. And occasionally I just had to be like, so sorry, but like, you can do this or that. And like, I really hate to like, to interrupt like that, but I was just so appalled by how little, how poor a foundation most people seem to have with the tool. And I was able to, and I immediately thought, okay, I need to create a great training resource, maybe courses that go through like from beginner to advanced. And really what I was most interested in is going beyond the basics, because Sketch has a pretty simple interface. You can jump in and see like, okay, here's how I add a rectangle or an artboard or whatever. But at the same time, this seemingly simple tool is being used by the top design teams, the top digital design teams in the world. So like, what are the workflows that are enabling it to be used at that level? And that's what I find is often lacking from tutorials in general. And I just, while I was at that meetup, I started writing just lists of like, oh my gosh, this is a trick, or this is a workflow that I need to include. And I shortly after discovered a tool called Teachable that is like an online platform that allows you to put out a course, and it's kind of a basic CMS. It manages users, it manages checkout, and what I realized is that they took a relatively small fee plus transaction fees. And before then, I had taught a class about icon design through another online online learning website and platform, and I made 20% of the sales, and it did not justify the like 2 months of work that I put into this course. And I thought, if I can make more than 20%, this could actually be worth it. And that's when I started developing Sketchmaster, and it took me 6 months. And all of my courses since then have taken me at least 6 months, if not like 8 or 9 to get out the door. So it's only really feasible by having it as my own platform. And I just decided to commit to it. And about 2.5 years ago, I launched Sketchmaster with the first 2 courses that went over the fundamentals of Sketch.
Yeah, and that was when I found you, and they're excellent courses. So what's been the biggest challenge with creating those? You've got the platform with Teachable, but yours are very very well produced.
Yeah.
It's not just you sitting
Thank
in
you.
front of you're not just doing a screencast. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about the production quality and what it takes to deliver that?
Yeah. So like this is one of those times where I'm just like such a perfectionist, and being a designer is um, so being a designer, I think, makes you question in general like how things are done, how things have been done to date. But then the additional pressure of being a designer, making design training for other designers meant that I really wanted everything to be buttoned up and representative of what I was teaching. Um, I wanted the courses to not only teach people things like design workflows and tricks and things at the highest level, but to just embody that in everything. So a number of difficulties. I started to question like how tutorials were made, and the first thing that went out the window was turning on a webcam and just talking into the camera. I really wanted them to be fast paced or well paced, edited, and I ended up writing them beforehand, putting a lot of care into the audio production, recording the audio separately from the screen recordings and the videos, spending a lot of time making custom visualizations and animations to describe concepts that would benefit from that. And so just the production process in general ended up being just very laborious.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Laborious. And then other challenges include, like I quickly realized even before I had launched that Teachable was kind of a consumer one size fits all platform for people who wanted to like have a little course on knitting or something. And it was not enough for designers and to have like a really elegant, smooth experience. So I started customizing it a lot. And at this point, I've ended up making at least 8, maybe a dozen custom systems, whether they're like a little app that runs here or there, or in a whole nother CMS, where I can. So, for example, with the cheat sheets, which are those notes that have like little icons from the interface and keyboard shortcuts and everything, I ended up developing a whole tool that compiles those that they can look great, and then I just copy a huge chunk of code into Teachable.
No
So
kidding. Wow.
none of it is done in Teachable. At this point, Teachable is the shell of all of the other things that I've developed on my own. Like even I realized early on, marking a video as completed, Teachable at the time, I'm not sure now, but at the time they only had the ability to mark one as complete and not unmark it as complete. And it also caused a whole reload of the page. And I just thought, this is not like I'm having people complain about this. I need to improve this. So with the developer, we have now a whole app and database that's running on a server, and we engineer our own system, integrated it back into Teachable. And so now you can just like check it on, check it off, and we have our own system because it needed to be
Yeah.
like
Because you listen
well
to your
designed.
you listen to your customers,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of challenges, production quality, and I think just in general making a really great experience for designers that embodies great design.
I think I initially found you through a link on the Bohemian Coding site. So, and that really spoke to me. I'm like, wow, Bohemian Coding is recommending this. I should check it out. How did you connect with them?
So I connected with some of their team members pretty early on when I was just writing articles. And at this point, their team is, I'm not sure, it might be 20 or more people. And I'm in touch with like at least half a dozen of them relatively frequently about different things, whether it's their founders or developer relations or meetup relations and stuff like that. So they were really generous to put a link on their Learn page to Sketchmaster, And over time, that has turned out to be definitely the biggest driver of signups to the courses, and it makes sense. There's nothing better than them recommending the tool. Um, the the relationship with them has been really key. I mean, in many ways, like I am totally an independent entity, and they don't pay me, but in many ways, like I'm kind of an extension of Sketch. Like I'm making all of this training, all of these resources about it. I was just last week working on the design of certificates, which we're about to launch, so that all students will get a certificate of being enrolled in whatever courses they're signed up for. And I was designing this icon for the certificates, and I was just thinking, like, I'm doing all this design work and I'm basically like doing it for Sketch, but it's like more directly for Sketch Master, which is totally enabled by them supporting it. So it's a really symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. A virtuous loop, right?
Yeah. And, you know, I do it for a lot of reasons, and I just love being able to support the design community. But there's no way around it. I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't have their support.
Sure, sure. How did you decide the specific topics? Because I know that we've got the first one, which is for total beginners, and then you move on to the UX design course, and then there's others on the way, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an advanced course about SVG
right.
workflows.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit when I first created Sketchmaster. I really kind of wanted to dive into the more intermediate and advanced topics, but I realized before getting those out there, I should have a good foundation of the fundamentals. So that's why I launched with those first two courses, and I decided those based on not only wanting to get people up to speed, but they're centered around two very different projects. One, the getting started is centered around icon design, and the UX design project on a mobile app design project. So UI UX is obviously the most common use case for Sketch, but also designing icons and digital graphics, things like that is another big one. And I felt like in general with Sketchmaster, I wanted the courses to always be incredibly practical and focused on different, like on a variety of projects.
Right.
I think one of the most important things, even if other designers aren't as interested in all the different types of design and graphic design that I am, I still think that like having some diversity in the skill set and the forms of design is really enriching and really important for kind of like a well-informed designer. So I think that kind of guiding people into some of those different projects was going to be key. And then, you know, as far as future topics and choosing topics, I try to just teach things that like I know and not pretend to know things that I don't. So I've got about half a dozen more like intermediate and advanced course topics that I have wanted to do, and I just need more help and time. So I'm working on the help thing. By the way, if any of your listeners are interested, I am hiring for the first time ever, a curriculum designer, somebody who can help me write and plan these courses. I'm also hiring a communications position. Both of those are contract positions, part-time, but the curriculum designer, I think, will probably pretty quickly become full-time. And that will enable me to put out more content, because even just keeping these courses up to date is like a part-time job.
Oh, it's got to be. It's got to be.
Yeah.
I mean, every time Sketch releases an update, which is like every 10 minutes, you know, you're there with an update to the course.
I know. They're on roughly an 8-week release schedule, which in like I love them, but like it also that can make my life hell sometimes. There are a lot of design topics that I really get excited about, like icon design. I mentioned type design, so advanced typography in Sketch is a course that I've wanted to do for a while. I mentioned that icon design class that I taught a number of years ago, and I would like to actually totally revamp that and re-release it on Sketch Master. So we'll see. But right now, I've been prioritizing just making sure that the existing portfolio of courses is up to date and really, really relevant for people.
That's great. So a library is on its way at some point. That's pretty cool.
That's the goal. Yeah.
All right. So speaking of the existing courses, let's talk about the latest update to the user experience. And before we dive in, I just want to give a shout out to that beginner course. Because I still have the two icons on my phone. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
I was brand new this a couple of years ago.
I have them on my phone too.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that great? It's just it's a little reminder of, oh yeah, I can do icons too. But so if we could just do a deep dive really into the user experience design course, because I think that's what our audience would be the most interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really so that's currently the longest course. The new 2018 edition the course went from 2 hours to 3.5 hours. It's now the longest and most in-depth course, and there's still tons of things that I don't have time to cover, like responsive design. So just a quick overview of the course, like it takes this mobile app design project from wireframes through visual design. And at this point, that's kind of an interesting process because that now has to do more with design systems than ever before. So how do you kind of develop a design for your platform, iOS or Android, using design systems, existing symbol libraries, and all of the new workflows? And then it takes that through the visual design process, goes over some visual design principles and best practices and like the techniques for them, and then goes into prototyping, which can now be done in Sketch.
Yep.
And the goal really is to take an idea from Sketch through wireframes, through visual design, to like an interactive prototype on your own phone, because that's when it really comes to life.
Right, and in the original version, that was extremely helpful for me, because just going through that whole process of the iOS app, in my case, that I was working on, it helped me directly work with a project for a client, after I finished.
Yeah.
So for folks who have already taken it, such as myself,
what's
the biggest benefit to retaking it? Aside from there's more video, there's a lot more content. How's it going to stretch that designer? Yeah.
So Sketch has come out with a number of features in the last couple of years, and digital design has changed just enough in the last couple of years that it felt like it really warranted a pretty comprehensive rewrite, especially I'd say of like half, if not more of the course. So the biggest one is that before then, like actually right when I was making the original course, symbols were completely redone in Sketch, and overrides became a thing. And this was still pretty much the early days of symbols. Libraries hadn't come out.
Yep.
Many symbol override features hadn't come out. Prototyping hadn't come out in Sketch. And in general, design systems weren't really a part of the conversation as much as they are today. So I realized there was a need to not just cover like symbols in one or two sections, but to really span like 3-4 sections to really set people up for working on real projects. Like I really see this course. I'm so glad to like hear you say that taking this course helped you get a job soon after, because I really think about like at the end of the day, this could be a 1 hour course. It could be a 3 or 4 hour course. What do people need to know to really start applying this stuff in real work? whether they're working on it independently or they're going into a firm or like a top tech company. What are the things they're going to be expected to know? And it seemed like really diving deeply into those, they're not just new features, but like new ways of thinking, new workflows, really necessitated a rewrite and a rethinking of the progression of the course. So I guess people wanting to go back and rewatch some of it will find a lot of that really useful. There are tons of new tricks in there about like how, not just like how to work with some of the type related buttons and features, but like how to actually think about typesetting in a user interface. So I've tried to explain a lot more of the design thinking behind the process that we're going through.
Cool. Very cool. And then just as a follow-on to that, what do you feel right now? You know, as you said, things have changed quite a bit, even in the last 2 years. You know, it's just constantly evolving every 3 months, every 6 months.
Yeah.
What is the biggest challenge for UX UI designers right now, in your opinion?
I think that there are probably a bunch of really specific technical limitations, but I think probably the biggest challenge that I see, this is totally just my own opinion, but it's like lack of creativity. I think that UX and UI design, especially UI design, but like let's just think about it like as one comprehensive thing, is kind of an extension of these other older design disciplines like industrial design, which is always thought about user experience, and graphic design. And the more that people doing digital design can know about those other disciplines, and ideally graphic design, because like that's what I'm mostly drawn to. And I think that there's just so much monotony in the way that things look, the way that things behave. User experience design is about like principles. It's about creating a fantastic experience for somebody. And that doesn't need to be done always in the same way with always like some new like style kind of applied over the top of it.
Yeah.
And I think that whether it's in interfaces or on the web, just like a little bit more creativity is a big factor. Another thing is, and this isn't really new, but just designs that adapt to more screen sizes, to more conditions, more variables is, I think, kind of a constant, and it's an increasing and it's an inevitable reality that we face as digital designers. And web designers have been dealing with this for a bit longer, but I mean, you now not only have like the possibility of all these different like aspect ratios for your app and needing like a flexible interface, but you need to switch between light and dark mode, which I'm actually working on for Sketchmaster right now. And there are just like so many variables to consider. I feel like and there are fallbacks for older versions. Really, I end up finding that you need to design like half a dozen versions of the same thing in order to just get it out the door. And
it's growing exponential, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just this exponential thing is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but the budgets don't accommodate that in the case of freelancers and even with full-time employees, you know, with the salary, there just isn't enough time in the day, right?
Yeah. So I also want to say one thing about the creativity thing that just popped into my head, which is that with all the talk about design systems, design systems are really helpful for getting a lot of people or a lot of different projects consistently implemented and ideally like having efficiencies and, answers to questions that you haven't necessarily asked yet. The downside is that you have answers to questions that you haven't asked yet, and you don't end up asking those questions. And so you don't end up creating more interesting, more unique solutions to different problems. And whether it's very practically working in Sketch with symbols and pre-existing components that you are like scared to detach or create too many copies of. Like, I think it's so important to, whether it's working on paper or detaching things in Sketch or having a separate page or a separate Sketch document where you're just going nuts. I think it's so important to just work really freely to come up with the solution. And then when you have a great solution, you can kind of work backwards and maybe reconstruct it using a system. But systems can really kill creativity, and they're valuable. But I also think that there's a flip side that isn't discussed enough in all the hype around design systems these days.
Do you feel it's almost like a conveyor belt approach in a way, with the impact on creativity?
Yeah. I think that it's kind of like the inevitable like designer goal, which is, or especially kind of like if you think about a modernist approach to design, which is we want everything to just be so well figured out, everything to be simple. Like, this is the ideal. I mean, think back to the history of modernism in Europe, where architects were building like new communities where they were like, this is going to be the ideal community. People will flourish. There's like, everybody has like is going to be living with modern architecture. And a lot of those communities really failed. And one of the reasons they failed is they pinned people into these boxes.
Right.
And they didn't allow people to kind of be humans, which is to customize things, be expressive, to like break out of molds. And design systems are like grids, right? They can help us as a tool, but they can also really constrain us. And depending on who's designing that system and how flexible it is, it can either kill creativity or just end up being ideally a useful tool for efficiently implementing ideas that have already been thought through.
Wow. Great insight. Just with the time we have left, you've written a ton of articles on Medium. Were all the earlier articles, I'm assuming those were also on Medium. That's kind of where you started, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
Are you still writing regularly? Do you plan to continue your output?
Yeah, I write when I have something to. I'm like such a bad content marketer. Like, I don't write consistently. Mm-hmm. I write when I have something to share. And often, like last year when I was working on the SVG course, I found that there were so many articles that didn't exist that I ended up writing 4 or 5 around the course that I found that I thought were necessary in order to support designers who wanted to learn about those topics. So I think it comes from a need, and I'm totally committed to continuing to write like great free articles, but I write them when I have something to share, and also when I have time to share them.
Sure, and they're all very, very niche too. They're just so pinpointed, with the content that you do share.
It surprises me that like they even have much readership. Somehow there are a lot of similar nerds like us out there.
Well, I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, me too.
So as we wrap up, just if you could share a little bit about what your professional goals are for yourself, for the courses, and just beyond that time frame.
Yeah. The goal for, I'll just start really quickly with the goal for Sketchmaster and for training. I had no idea when I was working on it if it was going to be much of a moneymaker, and it has turned out to be kind of like in the middle. It can keep itself going. It's sustainable. It's now at the point where I can like hire 1 or 2 people to help me part-time, but it's not like an explosive success. So that's been really helpful for clarifying why I'm doing it. And I'm really doing it to connect with the design community and to help people. I've started to do more in-person trainings at agencies and corporations. And that's just another way that I can go in, lead a workshop, and really have a great impact with designers. So my goal is to just kind of continue getting that out there. At the end of the day, like I think about Sketchmaster in the coming years and about the courses that I've had in my head for the last 2 years, which, like I said, is at least half a dozen. And I want to get them out of my head before I'm going to feel anywhere near done with it. And I also see Sketchmaster as a way of designing what I think is the best training. Like I created cheat sheets because I thought, what if there was like a really great digital implementation of the notes that you might scribble, where like you're drawing a little icon, you're like, maybe drawing a visualization in there, all sorts of graphics from Sketch's interface, keyboard shortcuts that look like little keys. Like, how could I make this like ultimate notes look? And so designing what great training, like especially what great online training looks like, is in one way that's a goal. And then personally, my goal is to just keep learning and feeling really eager and curious and stimulated by design as a practice. And for me, that means expanding into other areas like type design. Next year, I'm hoping to take an intensive like master's in type design program. It'll be part-time, so I'll keep Sketchmaster going. But that is, so basically I'm going to be recommitting to learning myself. Like learning to me is the biggest goal that I have in my life, because it means that I've got newness, I've got curiosity, and I'm stretching my wings. Like that's where I think creativity comes from. It comes from like the unknown, the discovery, the excitement, the energy that comes from that. Those are some of my personal goals.
That's terrific. Thank you. Now, where can people find you, Peter?
People can find me at sketchmaster.com, or my own website, which is pnowell, Nowell.com. Yep. You can also find a link to it on the Sketchmaster website. Sure. I'm on Twitter at pnowelldesign, Instagram there too, and Medium. And you can find links to all of those on sketchmaster.com. Yep.
And I'll be sure and put them in the description as well. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Peter, and for giving us these wonderful courses that can advance people's skills. There's a real need for it, and it's excellent, excellent material. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary.